Unexplained ranger disappearances in national parks that remain unsolved. The history of the disappearance of park rangers is always full of mysterious and unexplained details that often resemble plots from the most unsettling of thrillers. The guardians of the national parks, the men and women we consider to be the undisputed masters of the wilderness, are vanishing. These are not weekend hikers or unprepared tourists. These are seasoned experts, individuals rigorously trained to survive and thrive in America's most rugged and unforgiving landscapes. They are the ones who venture into the wild to find the lost. So, what happens when the rescuers themselves become the missing? These stories are a chilling departure from the ordinary. They represent the most baffling and disturbing unsolved cases in the annals of the National Park Service. These are not tales of inexperience meeting the indifference of nature. These are the cases of park rangers who disappeared from the very parks they swore a solemn oath to protect. Their files have grown cold, but the stories themselves remain searingly active in the minds of those who know them. They are official cold cases that defy any and all easy explanation, feeding a quiet, persistent fear among those who still walk the same paths, who still gaze into the same silent canyons. The United States National Park System is a treasure, preserving some of the most untamed and awe-inspiring landscapes on Earth. Within these vast expanses of raw nature, the safety of millions of visitors rests squarely on the shoulders of a few thousand national park rangers. They are the thin line between a memorable vacation and a life-or-death struggle. But sometimes, their unparalleled skills, their profound knowledge, and their deep respect for the wild are simply not enough. This is what happens when the most capable people vanish under the most mysterious of circumstances. Section 1. The Vanishing of Paul Braxton Fugate. Our first case takes us to the stark, alien beauty of Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona. Known to the Apache as the land of standing-up rocks, it is a breathtaking 12,000-acre maze of volcanic spires, balanced rocks, and plunging, shadowy canyons. It was here, on the quiet afternoon of January 13, 1980, that 41-year-old park ranger Paul Braxton Fugate walked out for what should have been a routine patrol and was never, ever seen again. His disappearance would become one of the oldest and most enduring mysteries in the history of the National Park Service. Paul Fugate was not what you might call a typical ranger. He was a fiercely individualistic man, possessing a love for the wilderness that ran bone deep. But this passion was often at odds with a contentious relationship with the Park Service bureaucracy. In a telling episode from his past, he once fought a grueling 5-year legal battle to get his job back, a battle he ultimately won, after being fired for the seemingly minor infraction of having long hair. This single act paints a picture of a complex and determined man, deeply committed to his work in the wild, but also unafraid to challenge the system he worked for. On the day he disappeared, Sunday, January 13th, 1980, an unusual stillness had settled over the monument. He was the only permanent staff member on duty, a lone sentinel in a vast kingdom of stone. Around 2 p.m., Fugate mentioned to a seasonal clerk that he was heading out to check on a trail, a simple foot patrol he had likely done countless times before. He was last seen walking toward the park entrance, a familiar figure in his green and gray National Park Service uniform. He left his service radio and his keys behind in his office. He took absolutely nothing with him. When Fugate failed to return as evening fell, a subtle sense of unease began to creep through the small community. That unease soon curdled into genuine alarm. His wife was notified, and a frantic, informal search began. The flashlight beams of his colleagues cut feeble paths through the immense, ink-black darkness of the Chiricahua night, their voices calling his name into a wilderness that offered only an unanswering, absolute silence. The very next morning, a full-scale search and rescue operation was launched, transforming the quiet monument into a hub of urgent activity. The Cochise County Sheriff's Office, the Bureau of Land Management, and other state and federal agencies descended on the park, bringing with them helicopters, tracking dogs, and teams of expert searchers. For days, they combed every single one of the 12,000 acres of rugged, treacherous terrain. Highly trained teams rappelled into the deep, dark canyons and swept every inch of the area where Fugate might have gone. They found absolutely nothing. There was no sign of a struggle, no piece of dropped equipment, not a single shred of his uniform. It was as if Paul Fugate had been meticulously and completely erased from the face of the earth. In the suffocating absence of evidence, theories began to swirl like dust devils in the desert wind. The most prevalent and persistent theory was that Fugate had stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see, an illegal drug deal or a human smuggling operation in a remote corner of the park, and was permanently silenced. This theory was bolstered by strange, tantalizing clues that emerged in the days that followed. Some park employees reported discovering vehicle spin-out tracks in the dirt, along with what they believed were signs of a struggle, near an area Fugate was supposed to have been checking. Then, a far more disturbing witness account emerged, one that painted a truly chilling picture. A park employee claimed to have seen Fugate later that same afternoon, around 4 p.m., inside a pickup truck that was speeding away from the monument. According to the witness, Fugate was in his full uniform, slumped between two unidentified, imposing men. The witness later underwent hypnosis to retrieve more details, describing Fugate's expression as looking profoundly sad and dejected. Despite this incredibly specific and disturbing lead, the two men and the pickup truck were never identified. The official response from the National Park Service, the very organization Fugate had dedicated his life to, was shocking. Just over a year after he vanished into thin air, the NPS officially fired Paul Fugate, citing abandonment of post and classifying his disappearance as voluntary. This decision, for 6 long and agonizing years, refused to declare him legally deceased, leaving his wife trapped in a devastating state of financial and legal limbo, unable to collect benefits or move on with her life. It wasn't until 1986, after immense pressure, that the ruling was finally overturned and his death was officially, if not factually, confirmed. Decades have passed. The trail has gone colder than the desert night. But the case remains open. Paul Braxton Fugate is still the only National Park Service employee to be listed as unaccounted for in the line of duty. Did he simply walk away from a life he no longer wanted? Was he the victim of a tragic, undiscovered accident in that labyrinth of rock? Or did he pay the ultimate price for being a dedicated ranger in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time? The silence from the Chiricahua Canyons offers no answers. Section 2. The Last Season of Randy Morganson. Our next case moves us from the sun-scorched deserts of Arizona to the majestic, formidable wilderness of California's Sierra Nevada. Here, in the vast, interconnected expanse of Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, another highly experienced and deeply respected ranger vanished, leaving behind a mystery so complex and heart-wrenching it would take years to even begin to unravel. This is the story of Randy Morganson. In the world of backcountry rangers, Randy Morganson was nothing short of a legend. By the summer of 1996, at the age of 64, he was embarking on his 28th season as a seasonal backcountry ranger. He had spent more time living and working in the High Sierra than the iconic naturalist John Muir himself. He possessed an almost supernatural intuition for the wilderness, a sixth sense for its rhythms and dangers. He was, in short, the ranger that other rangers looked up to, the standard by which they measured themselves. But the 1996 season was different. Behind the stoic facade of the seasoned ranger, Morganson was a man in turmoil. He was in the midst of a painful and emotionally draining divorce. After dedicating nearly 3 decades of his life to the Park Service as a seasonal employee, he faced a bleak future with no pension and very little money saved. The man who was a revered king in the backcountry felt like a complete and utter failure in the so-called real world. On July 21st, 1996, Morganson departed from his remote, isolated ranger station at Bench Lake for a routine multi-day patrol. He left his .357 Magnum revolver behind, a detail his colleagues would later find deeply unsettling. He then walked out into the vast, lonely wilderness of his patrol area, an area he knew better than his own home, and simply vanished. When Morganson failed to make his scheduled radio check-in, the silence on the other end of the line sent a ripple of dread through the ranger community. A massive search and rescue operation was quickly set into motion. Nearly 100 people, many of them fellow backcountry rangers who knew him personally, converged on the park. It was a grim and surreal task, searching for one of their own. They knew Randy's habits, his favorite fishing spots, his preferred campsites, the hidden corners he loved. But their intimate, unparalleled knowledge of both the man and the terrain yielded absolutely nothing. As the frustrating search dragged on for weeks, every conceivable possibility was considered. Foul play was a remote possibility, given the isolation. The theory that he had intentionally disappeared to start a new life was also considered, but just as quickly dismissed by those who knew his deep connection to the Sierra. But the idea of suicide weighed heavily on the minds of those who were aware of his recent depression and personal struggles. Eventually, with no new leads and the weather turning, the official search was called off. For 5 long years, the mystery of Randy Morganson's disappearance lingered like a persistent ghost over the High Sierra, a sad and unsettling story whispered around campfires. Then, in July of 2001, 5 years after he had vanished, a trail-building crew member, working in a remote, off-trail area, stumbled upon the first clue. It was a tattered, weathered Park Service shirt, and pinned to it, still glinting in the sun, was Morganson's badge. Soon after that pivotal discovery, more items were found nearby. A backpack, a single hiking boot, and protruding from that boot, a human leg bone. Randy Morganson had finally been found. His scattered remains were discovered at the bottom of a small, steep waterfall in a creek drainage. The official investigation concluded that his death was accidental. The most likely scenario, they determined, is that he was attempting to cross a snow-choked creek when a fragile snow bridge collapsed beneath him. The fall likely caused him to break his leg, incapacitating him. His body was then washed downstream by the current and hidden amongst the jumble of rocks and debris. This official explanation, however, has not quieted all the questions. One of the most perplexing and debated details is the location of his park radio. It was found at the top of the waterfall in a dry bag, not with his body at the bottom. This single detail has led to years of intense speculation and debate. How could the radio have ended up there if he had been swept away from that spot? Author Eric Blem, in his deeply researched book about the case, The Last Season, suggested a more tragic and calculated possibility. He speculates that Morganson, burdened by his financial woes and wanting to provide for his estranged wife, may have intentionally made his death look like an accident. A death by suicide would not have been covered by the government's life insurance policy, but an accidental death while on the job would ensure his wife received a substantial benefit. Was this his final, desperate, and calculated sacrifice? A final act of love and duty played out on a lonely stage? The case of Randy Morganson is officially closed, but the story is far from simple. It remains a haunting exploration of the wilderness we see on a map and the much more complex, uncharted wilderness that can exist within a human heart. What truly happened in the summer of 1996 is a secret Randy Morganson took with him into the wild he loved so much. Section 3. The Cryptic Disappearance of Gilbert Gilman. Our final case transports us to the lush, temperate rainforests of Olympic National Park in Washington state. It was here, on June 24, 2006, that a man named Gilbert Gil Gilman vanished. His disappearance reads less like a missing hiker case and more like a high-stakes spy novel. And while Gilman was not a park ranger, his story is inextricably linked to the park, involving a last known sighting by a ranger and a massive, fruitless search on park lands. Gilbert Gilman was an exceptionally accomplished and uniquely skilled individual. At 47 years old, he held the high-powered position of Deputy Director of the Washington State Pension Fund, managing billions of dollars. But his background was much, much deeper. Gilman was a decorated combat veteran of the U.S. Army's elite 82nd Airborne Division, a man who had been awarded 2 Bronze Stars for his service. He later worked as a military interrogator and a civilian contractor in Iraq, specializing in counterintelligence. He was reportedly fluent in Arabic, Russian, and Chinese. This was not a man who would simply get lost on a trail. On that fateful Saturday in June 2006, Gilman drove his distinctive Ford Thunderbird to the Staircase Ranger Station area of the park, a popular entry point for day hikers. He was last seen by a park ranger near the trailhead. The ranger noted his attire, which was shockingly inappropriate for any serious hiking. A Hawaiian shirt, simple khaki pants, and sandals. He was carrying only a camera. The next day, his Thunderbird was found in the parking lot, exactly where he had left it. The search that followed was immense and immediate. 62 searchers, professional tracking dogs, and helicopters equipped with advanced heat-seeking FLIR equipment scoured the dense, tangled forest for 10 excruciating days. And just like in the case of Paul Fugate in the Arizona desert, they found absolutely nothing. Not a sandal, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace. It was, as his mother would later say in utter bewilderment, hard to imagine a person can just disappear. Given Gilman's extraordinary and clandestine background, the theories surrounding his disappearance quickly moved far beyond a simple hiking accident. His own mother firmly believed his vanishing was directly connected to his past work in intelligence. She suggested that he might have been recruited or compelled to take part in a secret mission that required him to convincingly vanish from his civilian life. Then, the case took a much darker and more terrifying turn. A true crime television show investigating the case proposed a chilling possibility that Gilbert Gilman was an unknown victim of the notorious serial killer Israel Keyes. Keyes was a meticulous and terrifying predator known to travel extensively across the country, planting kill kits, buckets filled with weapons and body disposal tools, in remote locations, often inside national parks. From 2001 to 2007, Keyes lived in Washington state and had obtained permits to access the backcountry of Olympic National Park, the very park where Gilman disappeared. The theory gained even more traction when investigators discovered an almost unbelievable coincidence. On the very day that Gilbert Gilman vanished from the staircase area, Israel Keyes was competing in a marathon less than a 2-hour drive away. The proximity in both time and location was stunning. The FBI investigated this potential link, but eventually stated they could find no direct evidence connecting the two men. Still, the terrifying specter of Israel Keyes has haunted the Gilman case ever since, a dark shadow of possibility that is impossible to completely ignore. In August 2015, 9 long years after he walked into the forest dressed for a casual stroll, Gilbert Gilman was officially declared dead by the state of Washington. No body has ever been found. No physical evidence has ever surfaced to explain his fate. Was he simply a man who took a wrong turn on a simple walk? Was he a spy called back into the shadows for one last mission? Or was he the victim of a random, horrifying chance encounter with one of the country's most brutal and efficient serial killers? Gilbert Gilman's file may be officially closed, but for those who knew him, the story is far from over. The cases of Paul Fugate, Randy Morganson, and Gilbert Gilman are separated by decades and thousands of miles, yet they are bound together by a deeply unsettling thread. They are stories of men who stepped into places of profound, undeniable natural beauty, places that also hold a capacity for impenetrable and eternal mystery. These national parks, for all their trails and signposts, are still fundamentally wild, governed by forces far older and more powerful than any map or human authority. These disappearances underscore a humbling and often ignored truth. No amount of experience, no level of skill, can ever completely eliminate the inherent risks of the wilderness or the terrifying unpredictability of human nature. The official files contain theories, timelines, and witness statements, but they offer no definitive answers, no final chapter. The details that linger are the haunting fragments of stories that will likely never be whole. These cases force us to confront a difficult reality, one that our modern world tries to shield us from. Sometimes there is no closure. Sometimes the questions are all we have. Sometimes there is only the search, the lingering questions, and the enduring, profound silence of the wild. The men and women of the National Park Service continue their vital work. They continue to patrol these vast landscapes, always watching, always aware of the ghosts that haunt these trails and the secrets the parks continue to hold. What you think about this story? Write in the comment your opinion. On my channel, you can watch other revenge or cheating stories. See you soon, my dear viewer.